We'll call this meeting. All right, thank you for joining us here for the July 17th, 2025 meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board. At this time, we'll call it to order, and can we get a roll call?
Chair Johnson,
Here.
Supervisor Madrone,
Present.
Councilmember Napier,
Here.
Mayor Burgell,
Here.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny,
Here.
Councilmember Orr, Pack Member Arroyo,
Here.
Pack Member Allstrand.
All right, thank you for that. And at this time, we will adjourn as the HCOG Board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And our first order of business is public comment. Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? And seeing none, we'll close public comment and move to the consent calendar, where we have 4 items: the approval of the meeting record from June 16th, 25, the LTF claim for the city of Ferndale for fiscal year 25-26, LTF claim for the city of Fortuna 25-26, and the LTF claim for the city of Riadell fiscal year 25-26. Would anybody like to pull anything? Is there any public comment on the consent calendar? I see none. We'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. And there are no items that were removed from the consent calendar, so we'll move to reconvening as the HCOG Board, and we'll entertain a motion for that.
I'll move for that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have a board action item, a revised HCOG Personnel Policy and Procedure Manual, and revising that. And we have a staff report.
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson, and pleasure to be here this evening. And our first item, as you noted, is a proposed update revision to HCOG's personnel policies and procedures. So for anybody who is not aware, an agency's personnel policies and procedures handbook is kind of like the human resources guidelines. It outlines expectations for employees and expectations for how HCOG will conduct business as it pertains to HCOG employees. So these, of course, are living documents, like many things are. So from time to time, it's prudent to revisit or revise or make sure that they are up to date. And this would be the first update to the policy since 2023, which is when HCOG elected to move forward with the reduced work week, the 34-hour work week. So a number of changes were made at that time to reflect that. Since that time, there still are a number of other revisions that staff had identified were necessary, just working with the policy, reviewing the policy when coming across, issues that were being dealt with at HCOG. And those had been slowly tracked in the years since. And one of the items that I picked up in my transition was picking that up and reviewing some of the changes that had been brought forward, and decided to bring this forward at this time with some of current staff's review of these items and the recommended revisions that fall out of it as well. So that's why, even in a relatively short amount of time, with me holding this position, this being is brought forward to you now. So it does, of course, have suggestions or revisions that reflect our most recent review, but it also has some things that had been kind of cataloged and carried forward through the years. So I will note that there was a red line version of the proposed revisions that was included in the staff report, and a number of the items are more editorial in nature or just clarifications. The ones that have a little bit more to them were outlined in the staff report with the sections as it ties to it. I don't plan to go through each and every one of those in detail, but of course, should any of the board members have questions or want to discuss any of them, I'm more than happy to. The one item I did want to note, and it was brought up in the staff report as well, is one proposed revision, which is something that kind of started to build predating myself in this position, but I'm bringing it forward nonetheless, is a proposed revision to the administrative leave policy. So for anybody who may be unfamiliar, administrative leave is basically pre-programmed compensatory time off for employees that are salaried. They're not hourly, so they're not eligible to receive compensatory time, but recognizing that those salaried positions are expected to work outside of working hours normally throughout the year. So when originally brought into HCOG, it was brought in as a uniform benefit for all employees at the 80 hours per year as shown. The revision I'm proposing to bring forward right now would be to install a tiered system where the executive director, who of course is the position that is a little bit more expected to be working outside of hours, receives the higher benefit. The other staff members that have a lower expectation of working outside of working hours have a benefit below that. And that in reducing that, we would also reduce it to reflect the HCOG's work week, which is 34 hours and not 40 hours. So that's why you see it recommended as being 68 hours for the executive director, 34 hours for all other positions. So that is the recommendation that is being brought forward by staff at this time, and happy to discuss that in further detail should the board have any questions. I will also want to note that the direction we are seeking from the board at this time is how you would want that to be enacted, assuming that you agree with that proposed revision in the first place. Similar to some revisions that have been brought forward in recent years, I think the most recent one was to the HCOG's health benefits policy. Of course, we have a couple of employees that currently are receiving the administrative leave benefit as it has been in the personnel policies for some time. So with that, the board could choose to keep existing employees on that benefit track and make it just so that new employees coming through would have the revised limits as proposed in the personnel policies, and the wording could be updated in the policies and procedures to update that, so employees hired before such and such date and after such and such date would have different benefit levels. Or the board could elect to move through and make the full revision now, which would affect current employees in addition to new employees in the future. So I do want to note that we have been working collectively through this within office staff. We've been looking at this together and bringing proposed revisions together. So it is something that we have talked about. To be transparent, of course, the option one where we change everything right out of the gate, of course, has we'll call it a mixed amount of popularity, and understandably so. Option two, where we would potentially make it to where employees hired previously kept the benefits that they were brought on with, and new employees receive the new amount, is generally a little bit more favorably seen. And then option three would be to do nothing, of course, and just leave the policy as it is, and that's something that the board could consider as well. So with that, I'm happy to hand it back to the board for any questions or discussion that you may have. Thank you.
When did it go from all employees get administrative leave to only a few?
Yeah, so when I don't know what a tremendous about when it was brought into the agency, but typically how it works is employees that are classified as exempt, so salaried non-hourly employees would receive the benefit, where employees that are paid hourly are not. So when it was brought in, as opposed to bringing it as a tiered system, and when I say tiered, I mean certain positions are given this much, higher level positions are given this much. It was just a uniform benefit as it was brought in for the non-exempt or the exempt employees.
That brings up a point of curiosity. I noticed the term confidential employee. in the manual. What is that? Or can you talk about it?
Yeah, there's,
You have to shoot me now.
we'll wait till after the meeting for that. There's a few terms in human resources that tend to get thrown around somewhat interchangeably. So confidential and non-confidential is somewhat analogous to exempt and non-exempt, which is somewhat analogous to a management level employee versus a non-management level. So a confidential employee is one that is not collectively bargained for, I believe, if I'm remembering my human resources 101 well enough, is a non-collectively bargained position that is a salary level position that could also be terminated at will.
Okay.
But
So would go from 80 to 68 hours and 80 to 34 hours.
correct.
Basically, the top two employees at this point, you and the senior planner.
Yes,
that-
yes.
is that right?
And I'll note any other classification. So of course, HCOG through the years has had a number of different, let's say, iterations of how the staff is. You know, when Debbie was here before, there was the fiscal administrative officer position, which currently is not a position that is staffed. That would be an exempt position if that comes back. So currently there are two, but it would depend on exactly what the staffing was and what the job classifications were at any given time.
Do you have any sense for whether we might be adding more employees to the eligible class anytime soon, or?
Yeah. So the intent, and let's say the flexibility that was brought forward in this active year's overall work plan and budget was to be able to move forward with reclassing a position, Amy's position, to be the fiscal administrative officer, the potential for that. And so we're working through things, and there is the potential that would be a recommendation brought forward to the board at some time in the future. And, of course, we've also talked about the potential for like a climate action program manager or some other thing that could be brought into the agency. And it's likely a position of that level would also be considered an exempt position. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Supervisor Madrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good questions. And I'm assuming that if we stayed with option 2, this is in our budget right now to continue to pay at that level. I personally like option 2. When changes like this happen, it can be really kind of jarring for staff, just to put it bluntly. And it's already what we offered. And so I can appreciate the desire to want to change it and bring it in line, I think, as it said, with other standards in the area or whatever. But I think that, making the change for newly hired employees, which you're not now, you're already on board. And as you said, there's just 2 of you right now. But that would be, I think, my preference, just because, I really want to support staff. And when somebody's hired at a certain place, something like that can be pretty jarring, frankly, to you and or the other person. So that's just my preference, but I'd like to hear what the rest of the board thinks as well.
Council Member Atkins Salazar.
I have a couple questions. When we went from the 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, was there a reduction in pay that went along with that?
There was not.
Okay, so for me, that's the lens I felt. I agree with what you said, Supervisor Madrone, but that's the lens I was looking at it for. Is on the one side, employees were hired with this equation, but then we have now reduced a whole day out of every work week, which I think is what you're addressing in this, trying to balance out, because time accrued is what leads to those time off hours. So I feel really in the middle, because if I was an employee, I would not want, my time off cut. Also, as somebody that's, has in charge of, this budget, and with, it seems that should have been something that we thought about when we adjusted those hours, right? That should have been questions. I know, I think it was presented to us that they wouldn't lose any benefits, healthcare and such, and so we just move forward. But I think, in the future, this is just something we could all learn from when making adjustments, because that's a lot of extra days off in a year, which I would also enjoy if I was working here. So I don't think that was super helpful because I'm staying right in the middle, but yeah.
Could I have a follow-up?
Councilmember Jorgensen.
Thank you. I would also go with option one. Although I understand what has been said, it's a modification that simply should have been made at the time the work week was adjusted.
And Mayor Burgell, were you wanting to? Nope.
So when we reduce the hours in the work week, certainly for those who are reporting hourly, that impacts their paycheck, but it's also clear how much they're working and not working. Where with exempt employees, sometimes there's still a workload that they're picking up. So I guess a question that I have is, do we know when we reduced from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week, was there additional workload for those exempt employees that in a sense might justify that administrative leave? Or do we know that essentially the whole workload was suppressed equally across the board?
There's a certain amount, I guess, of the backstory that I can't necessarily speak to insofar as when the change was made in 2023. I can confirm in my discussions with the previous executive director that, you know, as we've transitioned to being more in a 34-hour work week, that, you know, staff have been able to pretty much reliably work within that time. Of course, it does change things because things will pop up outside of that time, you know, on a staff member's day off. Sometimes if a meeting happens, So there's still work outside of what otherwise is the, you know, call it the contracted expected hours. But I don't know that the reduction has, you know, made it to where people need to specifically be working more outside of it just because of workload.
It was my understanding that, I'm sure this is really fun for staff to listen to us summarize their lives so that they could do it so much better. So I apologize that it wasn't like one day is going to be a remote day. It was, we can do what we can do in 4 days, you know, which was, I felt really generous. And I do feel like it's not really, I guess it's not fair to change it right now. We should have done that. Like if we wanted to do this, it should have been discussed at the time we made those changes so that staff could have, maybe they wouldn't have wanted to do that if it meant a reduce in time off, right? They might have had a different feeling. So I guess I will speak up for item B because that seems to be the most fair and generous, and new employees will just really be envious of the former ones.
Yes, Supervisor.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm curious how it works, right? So when you're working a 34-hour week, but you're one of these exempt employees that is theoretically supposed to work more than that if necessary because you're salaried. How does that work? How does that get recorded? Because how does it equate to, somebody said, well, you accrue the administrative time out. How do you accrue it if you're not putting it on the time card? How do you know, how does that work?
Yeah, so, you know, if you're an hourly employee, you're tracking your
Yes.
time exactly like that hourly. So it's
Yeah.
pretty clear when
Yeah.
when time is marked compensatory.
Yeah.
For a salaried employee, administrative leave is applied in its full amount the first day of the fiscal year. And then no tracking is done beyond that. It's more or less kind of, I don't know if industry standard's the right word, but it's the acknowledgement that this is going to happen over the next 365 days. So here's your time to basically have as offset for that. So we don't have an ability to otherwise track it. You know, to keep within our budgeting and how our hourly rates are translated into the OWP, you know, even if employees were working above or changing it, you know, we have it happen so that your time equals 40 at the end, so that doesn't throw off our quarterly reporting and our budgeting and other things like that. So,
Yeah.
but yes, it comes in as a blanket benefit at at the first day of the fiscal year.
So, if I understand correctly, basically you're given that administrative leave as a benefit at the start of the year, and then it's up to that employee, that salaried employee, to decide how much of that to use when and where during the fiscal year.
Correct.
And they would just simply put it on their time card instead of under their normal line item. There might be a line item for administrative leave, like there is one for sick leave or for vacation or those other things. So it's simply a matter of trust on the part of the salaried employee as to how much they might take use of that. What has actually been going on in reality? Are the exempt employees using all of that every year? Or is it being really judicious and just a small amount here, a small amount there, based on a trust factor of, well, I worked, quite a few long weeks there in July or August or whatever, and I'm going to go ahead and use some of my administrative leave. It sounds to me like it's a trust relationship, so to speak.
It is, but I'll note that, whether it's at HCOG or other agencies, because this is a very standard benefit that is provided, when you get those people that are in exempt positions, they're the folks, not that everybody isn't dedicated, but that are especially dedicated and that are working hard and that are really hired and put into those positions because they recognize that time and that commitment that is required. And I can, speak on behalf of in my time here at HCOG, we certainly have those staff that are here now. There's public meetings, there's all sorts of things that are happening outside of time, and everybody's ready to jump on that, when they need to. So, there is some level of trust in that. I would suppose. I will note it is a use or lose benefit too. So if it's not used by the end of the year, it does not roll over into subsequent years. Right. And yeah, I just to go back on a comment too from board member Atkins Salazar too. So to my understanding, and I have talked to existing staff about this and the previous executive directors. So the admin leave benefit as a modification was not discussed at the previous time. So it was completely a new topic for staff to be bringing it up at this time. And I do want to just note pointedly that the recommendations I'm bringing forward in this particular case are by no means a reflection of our staff and our effort. Folks are working hard and they're dedicating themselves, and they should be absolutely recognized for that. It's more a recommendation on behalf of myself at this time, recognizing, the working weeks that have been established and really trying to fit it more within the broader standard of having a tiered system where, again, there's just some positions due to their nature that are going to be expected to do it more than others. So
I can appreciate that, and I appreciate all your explanations. But once again, I think, you were hired and previous staff all, like you said, it didn't really come up during that discussion of changing the work hours and stuff. So again, I feel, that 2 is probably the best option. But again, it's really up to this board to decide, what folks think. But I'll just say I haven't changed my mind, I guess. So.
Well, I fall into the category, if I'm allowed my opinion here, of item 2 also. It was something that I would see that should be written down and memorialized someplace, that when you make that kind of change, it needs to be addressed at that time. So we didn't do that, never thought about it. So I think that we should put that on the wall, with a Post-it note, and remember that for the next time. So, and I don't know if there's any public. Yes.
Since this is a board item, I'll make my comment as a public comment. I think it is a little hard to not think about specific individual. I realize this is a policy change you're considering that doesn't necessarily consider the people in those positions, but with an organization of 3 people, it's kind of hard not to. And I do want to voice that, the person currently in the senior regional planner position who's in this room, Una has, I had the unique experience, well before being an elected official, of working with Una for 15 plus years, and seeing, the person in that position, who was Una, come and attend a lot of evening meetings and technical advisory, committee events, and participate in a lot of transportation related events that happen in the evening and on the weekend. And has always really gone above and beyond to be there and has been in this field for so long that, there's a lot of value offered there. And so I just, it sounds like you're leaning towards option 2, but I want to voice my support for that as well. Because it's not necessarily time off. It's time to compensate folks who are working evenings and weekends. And as much as we might not all get compensated for that time, I want other people to be and to feel really valued. And, this is such a tiny but mighty organization that I just think there's a lot of value in maintaining what's currently offered. And whether that's extended to new employees or not, I have no strong opinion on, but I do feel pretty strongly about it being retained for those who were hired under that understanding. And I concur about, it wasn't changed when the 3/4 hour work week was changed, but it's also, 34-hour work week. That's at 85% of 40 hours, and an 85% reduction from 80 hours would be 68 hours. So to cut that in half again, which is what's proposed here, seems like too much to me. So that's my opinion, and I appreciate you hearing me as a member of the public.
And I believe there's also the possibility of a planner returning in the fall. So that would also need to be addressed. And it's not someone who separated but went on a sabbatical.
Yeah, and what I will note is the position that staff member holds, I believe, is an hourly position. So that is one that is not subject to administrative leave at this time.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, I was actually kind of leaning into the one camp, but the last presentation convinced me that 2 would be the more appropriate. And also, in having noted the really high quality of the paperwork that's produced for this organization, that's another factor that I think counsels towards keeping our present staff as happy as we can and rewarding them for a job well done.
Yes. Councilmember Napier.
Yes, I also was leaning towards point number 1. And on that note, I want to commend Brendan for bringing forward this, because it takes courage and integrity to say, I actually am looking at reducing a benefit to a staff member. That's very challenging to come forward, and no reflection on the staff member or their work. But I think it's really valuable to acknowledge that. So I appreciate that you brought that forward. That said, I see that the board is really willing to fall on our sword. I wasn't there at the time, but it sounds like we were saying that this didn't happen at the time it should have, for a more robust discussion and acknowledgement of the long-term effects. So, I can see, even with the courage that you have in bringing this forward, and I think the accuracy with which you would implement that, I think that item 2, or the second proposal, is also really worthwhile. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no more,
I just comment, I remain option 1. I think when you have a policy book, it should remain consistent throughout. And this option 1 does that. And it is absolutely a sensitive area, or can be, but it's no reflection on employees who do work those extra hours and at times probably don't even record it.
Thank you, Councilmember Jorgensen. Yes, Mayor Burgell.
So I too appreciate you bringing this forward. I do believe, though, because we didn't discuss it earlier, that we should stick with what we have, we made a mistake. Let's move forward. And I too, I want to appreciate Supervisor Arroyo's comments, because I too have seen staff, Una, Stevie, different members out in the public on the weekends, in the evenings, all the time, really promoting what they do. And I really want to share my appreciation for that. And I don't feel like, taking things away from them would be the way to move forward.
I do have just two things I'll throw out there, just given the discussion and just things to consider, not necessarily to throw a monkey wrench into anything, but just to make sure that it's being discussed fully at this time and we're taking this opportunity. So thinking about if we move forward with option 2 and we rewrite the policy and we put in there employees hired on such and such a date, just a point of not fully being clear that might pop up is if we did say, to your point, we have an associate planner coming back and there has been discussions in previous years of, promoting and having 2 senior planners if we got to that time, or if we brought a staff member back to being the fiscal administrative officer, just really wanting to seek clarity from the board if a reclassification would be considered a new hire date at this time, or are we talking about employees that are hired within the organization at this time, regardless of the position they hold? I guess that's one point of clarification I'd like to make, or like to ask for, just so that it's very clear and we don't have somebody interpreting policy in the future thinking, well, it could go either way. I wonder which way it is. But if we got that would be wonderful. And I think the other thing I would just note in there too is, I want to clearly acknowledge again all the work that everybody is doing. And so with that, if the board did have a feeling on not reducing hours as much, that's an option too, of course. And I, just want to throw that out there, given that, the comments that we have received too. So I did present the 3 that are in there, and I guess one of them is a no change option, but just want to make sure that, everybody is fully aware that any other option in between that the board gets out of discussion would be viable as well. So.
It would
Mr. Chair.
make sense to me that if there was no separation, that wouldn't be an issue.
And is that the case, that this is a person who's currently still working, but they're on leave, or what's the status of the person?
That particular employee is on leave, and like I had noted, that position is not currently eligible for administrative leave, but should they enter into a position within the organization at a later date, even though their employed date with HCOG was several years ago, would that person be considered a new employee under that interpretation of the policy, given the reclassification, or would they be considered a pre-employee because they were already employed with the organization?
Well, I would say that unless somewhere else in the handbook that question is answered, I would consider them to be not a new employee.
Okay.
If they get reclassified, but.
Agree.
Yes, Councilmember Napier.
Thank you. I see that differently. Changing a position is a choice by an employee, and that is a reclassification. So if we continue to carry on and grandfather that which we already know, in a sense, is a mistake, the board didn't address it at the time, we can address that now for future changes, and I think this is the appropriate opportunity to do so. So I think something short of, unless they were on like a disability leave or some other kind of protected status, and then they return back into their position, then all things would remain equal. But if they're changing their position, then they're changing that with the knowledge that those type of benefits no longer exist within that position, or that there's been a change to them commensurate with the hours that are worked.
I guess I tend to agree with Councilmember Napier just to keep things simple. I guess I was thinking of all 4 employees and in the positions that they were, we shouldn't mess with that. But if there are to be, like a promotion or a change, that would be essentially the same thing you would be offering to a new person in. So it seems to me that if there's a change in position, that would make sense. I just didn't want to take anything away from people's current status.
And that's, one second. That's kind of where I fall, is the moving from one position into another, which may be an open recruitment, in which case, if it's an open recruitment, then a person coming in from outside of the organization, you would look at what because this is a different activity date and a different position entirely from the existing one. So that's just my opinion. Mayor Burgell.
I still disagree.
Okay.
And the reason I disagree is because if someone wants to move up in the organization and they have not separated from the organization, I think that it should be a non-issue. If they were separated and came back, that would be a whole different thing. But they're wanting to move up and be a part of the organization and change. And so I don't think that there should be something punitive or that they shouldn't be able to step right in.
And I think we have a public comment that
Okay, I was just reading the microphone directions. Thank you. Una Smith, public commenter with a particularly interesting relationship to the item. First, I very much appreciate the discussion, the very good questions, the fiscal responsibility you are showing, and I also really appreciate the value you've shown for my past work. And I'm just speaking for myself that as an administrative policy, I would think it would be very acceptable to recognize there was an oversight in considering 2 weeks and 1 week's of time off. And in fact, in previous personnel policies, the language for administrative leave was defined by 1 week off, 2 weeks off. It was then changed to 80 hours. And my comment being that making it more in line with the current 34-hour work week. So instead of the benefit being 80 hours right now, the benefit being 60 hours, I would find personally no offense in that. Thank you.
I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, whether we ought to split this into 2 votes maybe and see if we can agree on 1, 2, or 3 first, and then we can talk about how to handle the issue of interpreting the document.
that could be a good idea.
As a thought to try to move us along.
Any comment from the ED before we venture into that territory?
None from me. Again, I'd just like to really say I appreciate the discussion and happy to move forward however directed. So
Okay. Well, we're looking for direction. Oh, yes.
One last question. With what you just said, Una, are you suggesting that it would be that the 80 hours administrative leave, it went from 1 week, 2 weeks to 80 hours at some point in the past, and that because the work week now is 34 hours, are you saying rather than an 80-hour administrative leave, 68 hours would be acceptable? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, so I'm saying it's a 2-week valuation, but under a previous system. So if it were still a 2-week valuation, because in our weeks, we still do get the 6-hour credit for reduced workload. Mm-hmm. So I actually think, 80 is, well, I definitely appreciate honoring the benefit package that people got when they were hired. I still just, from a fiscal conservative point, I just think it's very consistent to say the 80 hours is now equivalent to 68. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did, very
Okay.
directly. And I just have to say, once again, with what was said by others earlier, the fact that, this is being brought forward by our executive director when it's actually a reduction in benefits for you. I mean, that's highly unusual for somebody to step up with that kind of ethics. I wish it wasn't unusual, frankly, but in this world today, I want to commend you for that. And also Una for what you just did. Saying that, well, given that the work week became 34, let's just go with 68 rather than 80. I mean, both of those, I think, are incredible examples of a high ethics level within our staff, and I just want to applaud that, frankly. And with that, if it's appropriate this time, I would like to make a motion. And I was thinking very much along the lines of what Director Kenny was saying as well. I think there may be a split here where there's a lot of support for one thing, but maybe the other thing we're split, and I don't want to send that message to staff. So I think splitting it is a great thing. Not that having a split vote isn't a bad thing. We have different opinions, and that diversity is important, to respect and recognize. But whenever you think it's appropriate for a motion to come forward.
If there's no more board questions or comments, we can entertain a motion with as much clarity as possible.
So
I just have to ask one more question. Sorry. Because I'm wrestling with two things right now. One of them is, and so this is going to be a question to our executive director. Part of me says there's 4 people. We have the funds. Let's just be generous, and if they move up into positions, that's fine. But then the other part of me is just wondering, would that be sticky? Like I'm really solid with option 2, but when we're talking about somebody promoting and then hiring, possibly hiring someone else, would that be problematic? Like, do you see a problem with what we're talking about? Like with your question, do you have thoughts on that?
There's always changes like that, and these aren't irregular in the workforce or the public sector. Of course, there was a time when pensions were common everywhere, and that went away for new employees in a lot of industries. Not in PERS employees, but just in general. HCOG, we have examples of that in our own personnel policies. In 2021 is when the benefit amounts, the HCOG provided benefit amounts for medical benefits for employees changed. And of course, it was kept the same for existing employees at that time, but new employees hired have a different benefit amount. So, it is a change, and people would always, prefer to have been hired or part of the organization when it was one thing versus the other. But, it's not an abnormal direction to be moving in. One other note, just because I want to interpret Una's comment and present it and make sure it's very clear too. Another option that the board can consider in this case is if it's recognized that it should be reduced because we have a reduced work week, but the board would want to potentially see people, retain benefits when they're working harder. I think perhaps our senior planner's suggestion was to say we don't turn it into a tiered system, but we say what was 80 hours is just now 68, but it's 68 across the board. And if I'm interpreting correctly, and please by all means correct me if I'm not, but it would be that, and that would be a change that could be recommended as being enacted immediately. So I don't want to speak for the employee in this particular case, but just want to make sure that at least what I was hearing and the intent of that was clear.
It would be great if you guys could quit arguing against yourselves. That would make it a lot easier up here.
Well, no, I appreciate it, and to your point, it's always sticky when you wade into these waters, but it's important that you do so at times, and with that, like just wanting to talk about it, want everybody to feel represented in their ability to, provide their opinion or provide their feelings on how it would impact them. So again, I just appreciate the conversation, and sorry to keep making it go longer. Just remembering the ASCE report card and being at the
fishbowl till 8 o'clock at night, and you were there, so it's been a long haul. So yes, do you have a?
I do, and as was mentioned, I think having two different motions is good. One to deal with this 1, 2, and 3, and then one to clarify new employees. So with that in mind, the first motion I would suggest would be to approve the changes that have been presented in the red line version, and add to that the change from 80 hours to 68 hours in the administrative leave, and make them affect only new employees. Keeping it simple. But hopefully that covers the issue. Is that enough clarity?
Just as one point of the clarification in the motion. So right now, the recommendation is 68 hours for the executive director, 34 hours for other exempt employees. So when you say 68, just want to be clear what the...
Right, is it gonna be
Yes.
68 for everybody?
I meant 68 for all positions that are
Across
in
the
that
board,
exempt.
okay.
Yeah, that's what was the intent. Thanks for asking for clarity. Appreciate that.
Do we have a second?
I could go with that and well, second.
Was there discussion?
I did want, are we going to define what new employee is?
Yeah, that's the next motion, I think, because
Yeah.
we need to do that.
Yeah, we need two separate. So we have a motion and a second for keeping things the same with the change to 68 hours from 80 hours. Now, does this require a roll call or a voice vote?
Yeah.
Chair Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Madrone,
Yes.
Councilmember Napier,
Aye.
Mayor Burgell,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny.
Aye.
Okay.
And with that, if I might offer a second motion, unless somebody else wants to do it? Okay. Don't want to jump. And the second motion would be to define new employees as those who have not been or are currently not in the employ of HCOG. So just to define, somebody that was on leave, on one level or another, would not be considered a new employee. Somebody that had separated but then was coming back would be a new employee, just to be really clear.
And how do we treat reclassification?
Reclassification is an existing employee, from my perspective, just to be clear.
But a reclassification
I heard you.
is a choice.
It
and
is.
they're electing to make that change, and it can be an increase in pay. But if we continue to move forward with benefits that we know we would not have done, that we should have addressed at the time, then we're kind of perpetuating that issue. And I think a reclassification is a really clear trigger not to perpetuate what we think should have been an adjustment some time ago. So a return to work within their same capacity, everything else stays equal. But if they choose to take a different job within HCOG, that it then falls into an exempt position, then it would be at the new tier of benefits.
Did we have a second? I'm sorry for protocol.
I'll second.
So I just wanted to say that I absolutely appreciate your perspective, and I think it's totally. I don't want to try and say valid, not valid. I hear you, I really do, and I think it's a very valid point. And that's why I created two motions, which was what also Director Kenny said, because I knew there was different opinions on this particular one, and I thought, well, at least if we do the first motion unanimously or strongly, it sends a strong message to staff of support. And then if there's a difference of opinion in this other one, that's a whole different matter, and it's valid. It could be 3-2, it could be 5-1, whatever. But it allowed for that respect for those different opinions is why I think you suggested it. as part
I
of
may
what
have
we
a
did.
solution for this one.
Okay. Please.
Given that the first motion was to simply modify it from 80 to 68 and to not make a tiered system and presumably make that effective immediately, there would no longer be a need for a pre versus post date if all that was being done was reducing it from 80 to 68. Unless, because that's at least my understanding was to say we would change it both to 68 and we'd enact it at this time.
That is the policy for admin.
That, at least that was the understanding
For new people, right? We didn't.
So
Jesus.
that stands for the existing people, but I thought we still had an issue with the definition of new employee. Because that doesn't really solve that, does it? The definition of new employee?
Maybe it's just clarity and understanding. So the original motion would be to change it for 68 for new employees, keep it 80 for existing employees. Is that the intent?
That is the intent.
Okay, sorry. I had a solution and then I lost the solution. So now it's back to you.
Okay, so I'm going to need clarification. The motion that you first made is to keep current employees where they're at, and then new employees are at 68 hours.
That for the administrative leave for exempt employees, yes.
Got it.
That was the intent. If it wasn't clear, my apologies.
No, there's been a lot discussed. So again, appreciate the added clarity and sorry to boondoggle us all there for a minute.
So now are we back? We have a motion and a second, right? So we need to vote, or somebody can make another motion.
Well, wait a minute, so we're on the second motion, which we're talking about who's a new employee.
Correct.
Okay, one observation, to Kat's point is that there's a workaround, like even if we, anybody who's coming back could just come back off leave and say, well, I'll take my regular job. And then let's talk about the new job, the reclassification. So they could work around any prohibition. You see what I mean?
Well, in this case, the person who is on sabbatical now is on an education leave that HGOG will probably benefit from. And if he has the opportunity to move up with the possibility that his whole benefit structure could change, that could make someone later on say, I don't necessarily want to come back to the place after my leave is over. And it could make, in his case, it would be like pigeonholing him in a sense. Yes.
So the employee in question is not separated from HCOG.
No.
Not separated from HCOG. So if this employee moves up, great. But I don't think that, I agree with the motion.
Okay. I wasn't saying it. I was just trying to bring clarity to the different type of.
I understand. But if he had been fired or quit or all of those things and then tried to come back and have the new benefit, that would be different.
Yeah.
But this is not what
No,
is happening.
He did not leave. He's just taking a different position.
Exactly. And that's again why I would reiterate why I support this motion.
Chair, may I speak out of turn and say something?
Well, yes, go ahead.
I don't think we're only talking about one person, as our ED mentioned. There's another person who may move into a more senior fiscal position, so it's potentially two people. So just wanted to make sure, yeah.
What I mean when I say they're here,
Yes.
they're working, and they have an opportunity to better themselves, are we going to change their benefit structure just because they're changing a position and they're already an employee in the system?
Thanks for hearing me out. It just sounded like everyone was thinking about one position and not the other.
Well, whether it was one or four, if they haven't separated from HCOG,
They're still here.
They're still here.
Do they already have that benefit? That's my question. Do they already have that benefit and they would just be returning back to that?
Currently not.
And that's to me a line of delineation, is if they don't currently have that benefit, then we're holding open that door to something we recognize that we should have changed previously, that we're currently grandfathering for those who do have that benefit. And I guess I have both an advantage and a disadvantage in that I don't know these staff and the work that they do. And so that doesn't color my lens as far as, a personal feeling for them. But clearly they're very valued. But again, it's, maybe it comes to a question, is it the position that provides the benefits and that those benefits are attached to the position, or do benefits, no matter what, convey with a person, whether they move up or down or laterally within an organization?
Might I suggest, because there has been a motion in a second, that the board hold a vote, and if more deliberation is required after that.
Okay, final comment.
Final comment. I know.
comment.
We say these things, right? Well, again, I very much appreciate Director Napier's comments. And I don't think we're kicking it down the road this time. We did that when we changed from 40 to 32. You could say we didn't deal with that issue, right? And it was probably the appropriate time. I've heard this from many directors up here that we probably should have did it then what we did. What we're considering here tonight with this motion is no longer kicking it down the road, but we're going to allow those that are currently in our employment to reclassify and receive that benefit versus not. But we're not offering it to those that are not currently in our hire. So we're not letting it just go on forever. It really just those that are currently in our employment. So I see that's kind of how I'm seeing it, I guess. Either way is fine. I think they're both incredibly valid, and it's been a great discussion. So thanks for the final comment.
Mike,
Have a motion.
He's got a final.
unless I'm confused, I remain with consistency at 68.
Right.
So I would not go for the motion.
So to clarify, the motion would be based on what we did with our first motion, that a reclassification is an existing employee, not new, but they would be getting 68 administrative leave hours, not 80. And is that, that was my intent.
Correct.
Because, anyway, I don't want to split hairs, but just
No.
skip, I don't know if that, Mr. Jorgensen, if that helps, but anyway,
Hey, you're being consistent.
trying to be.
I think what we're saying is if you're working there now, whatever position you take, you're grandfathered in to the 68 hours, and new people go by the new rules just because of our lack of discussion originally. And I probably do think we should just take a vote and to see where we are.
To be clear, though, the point of clarification we brought up a moment ago would be to say that the current benefit receivers would stay at 80, new benefit receivers would be at 68, and the current motion is deliberating are we considering reclassification the event, or are we considering the quote-unquote original hire date as the event for qualification?
Original hire date.
That's the motion.
So
That's the motion.
given your first motion, that would mean that current employees that get promoted would also receive 80 hours, not 68. New employees would receive 68.
I guess that's accurate. Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads
Yes.
there.
So as time goes on, the benefit will be reduced to the new people that come on board.
Who would figure this would be the big discussion?
I know. Let's do a vote.
Not to go on too much of a tangent here, but there's always those little ones, it's dog licensing fees. It's, yeah.
That's a hot topic,
Yeah.
let me tell you.
There's certain spirited
Leash
ones.
law or on voice command?
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second. We've had much discussion. We're ready for a vote.
Okay.
And
Chair Johnson,
yes.
Supervisor Madrone,
Yes.
Councilmember Napier,
Yes.
Mayor Burgell,
Yes.
Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Yes.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Nay.
Mayor Pro Tem Kenny.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. And
Thanks.
Well, part of the problem was some of us kept using wrong numbers, including myself. So the 6880 got a little confusing, but I think we figured it out.
In hindsight, a spreadsheet up on the projector probably would have been a helpful tool.
I think the simplicity of it is that employees it's their hire date, is their not reclassification. So that's,
if you look in the policy manual, you'll see hired on this date gets this retirement benefit, hired on this date gets this retirement benefit, and I don't know if we have anybody, but then hired on this date gets this retirement benefit, because there has been 3. Same thing with medical insurance and premiums and who's covered and who's not. So this is not uncommon to have this item. It just makes Amy's job so easy. All right. We move now to a discussion item with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Update and Projected Schedule.
Excellent. All right. So I do have a quick PowerPoint that I will ask our Administrative Services Officer to bring up. Thank you very much. So yes, this, I know we've chatted about this a little bit in the executive director reports at the last few board meetings, but as the board is aware, we are in a Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, update cycle. This is currently cycle 7. And starting in May of this year, Housing and Community Development, or HCD as I'll refer to it from here on out, started the consultation process with HCOG. So fun fact, HCOG is the first RTPA that goes through the RHNA update cycles. So HCD handles all of the smaller counties that don't have a transportation planning agency themselves. And then HCOG is the first in the list to receive active updates. So as much as I would have loved to have put our determination or some more concrete information into the discussion item staff report, I elected not to. It's been a very fluid situation, and realistically, I think a lot of the community housing and community development staff were still really working to kind of get it to meet their own deadline, and unfortunately with that, it didn't come at the time for packet publishing. But I do want to provide an update here. We do have the final determination for the region that we can go over and share, because that is not changing at this time. Of course, I want to provide an update on schedule and just make the board aware of how it's going to be coming back to this board and how it's going to be going out to the local agencies in the community, and ultimately how we get to a finalized allocation recommended procedure that can end up with local agencies for their housing elements. You know what? I can't find it. It got buried. All right, so right here you'll see the cycle 7 determination. On the right-hand side is the table that comes in the determination letter from HCD. On the left-hand side are some notes we'll go through. So big picture, if you look in the bottom left, which unfortunately may be hard for some of you to see, the region's housing allocation for cycle 7 is 5,962 total units. What you'll see here on the right-hand side are all of the different numbers that go into making that projection. So it starts with the household and population projections, which are done by the Department of Finance. There's about 8 or 10 different adjustments that the HCD applies to either add or, I guess in no cases subtract, but to add more units to a region's allocation. But big picture, with all of the adjustments and with the projected growth of the county per the Department of Finance projections, the Humboldt region is being assigned 5,962 units overall. And so just as a case in comparison, in cycle 6, which was done in 2018 and 2019, the region's allocation numbers were 3,390. So we're looking to be about 2,500 housing units through across the region more than was assigned to the region in cycle 6. So with that, of course, it's a big increase, and I'll note, just so the board is aware, the projected population is not being projected to grow a tremendous amount between now and the planning period, which ends in 2035. I believe the Department of Finance is only projecting about 1,500 to 1,600 new residents within the county. Where it really falls, the allocation numbers in this particular determination are in the adjustments that are applied on the HCD level. There are a number that are traditionally applied, like vacancy adjustments and overcrowding adjustments. So those are adjustments to say, hey, your rental market, your housing market doesn't have enough vacancy, which is causing increase in price. You don't have enough households in order to make a healthy housing market, so we want to adjust your allocations by X amount. The one that was added, and you'll see on line 7, that adds a tremendous amount of housing units to the region and to the region's determination, is the cost burdened adjustment, which is 3,639 units. So about 2/3 or more of the units being applied to the region are a result of the cost burden adjustment. And for anybody that's not aware, cost burden means a household that spends more than 30% of their gross income on their housing costs, and that is for an owner-occupied unit or a rental unit. They look at both with the data that they use to get this. The other new adjustments, just so the board is aware as well, is the jobs housing balance adjustment. That doesn't actually result in any new housing being proposed for our region because, unfortunately, Humboldt, as a region in general, has fewer jobs than are required typically for a healthy economy based on the amount of housing we have. And then the last is the homelessness adjustment, which is new to this cycle. So you'll see in our determination that adds about 769 units. So we don't only receive allocations as kind of what I'll call, the big gross number, and gross not in the term of nasty, but in the term of overall, the big picture number. We also get a distribution of how many of those units need to fall within each income category. So what I have here on the left, you'll see under cycle 7, these are the distribution of units based on the various income categories, of which there are now 6. So big picture, about 52.3% of our 6,000 units need to fall and be allocated in the housing elements in the low to acutely low range, as far as the affordability of the housing being developed, and about 47.7 in the moderate and above moderate range. So comparing it to cycle 6, the first thing, just to explain away any confusion, in cycle 6 they only considered 4 income categories. In cycle 7 they took very low and then added 2 more below it, which is the extremely low and acutely low. So that's why you see 6 in one, 4 in the other. But big picture, in the region's cycle 6 allocations, it was about 60% moderate and above and 40% low and below. So overall there's about a 10% shift in adding more of that affordable or lower income housing as part of the allocation we received this cycle around. So we did receive those. Those are our determinations at this point. Staff, we have been in consultation with HCD. This table we received right here is the fourth, actually. So we've been commenting and going back and forth, and I believe I noted in the staff report we've received proposed allocations amount anywhere between 5,300 and 7,000. So it's been moving all over the place, but now it is set in stone. I will note, as an exploratory measure, a few weeks ago, staff had initiated looking at what was previously allowed, called a comparable regions analysis. So the old government code did allow for an MPO or an RTPA to take the determination from HCD and say, well, we'd like to look at it as opposed to the nationwide average. We want to look at it for comparable regions that look like ours and that have conditions that we do. So just to do our due diligence, HCOG staff, we did start that a few weeks ago just to see if that could turn into anything that would be a point of discussion to send back to HCD and maybe have our allocation numbers changed. But just so the board is aware, AB 130, which was the bill recently put forward with the budget, one of the items that was placed in the bill, along with that CEQA infill streamlining portion that I'm sure everybody's aware of at this point. Another one was removing the comparative regions analysis from the RENA process. So so the board is aware, what we've received is what we have, and there's pretty much a very small amount of input that could be provided to change anything one way or another. So with that, we have received that number, and now it is HCOG's job to develop a methodology to take those numbers and those numbers per each economic classification and to assign them to all of our member agencies in the county. So new to RENA this year, I believe last cycle there were 4 objectives, which you'll see on the top of this slide. Now there are 5, so they did add furthering fair state fair housing goals as an objective in the RENA sub-allocation process. But HCOG will be tasked with putting together a methodology to distribute the housing across the region that meets these 5 goals. The 5 goals being increasing the housing supply and mix in all areas of the county and equitably, to promote infill development and work towards the region's greenhouse gas reduction goals, to improve interregional jobs and housing mix, to improve housing type and cost diversity in each region, and again, furthering fair housing goals across the region. So for anybody who has not participated in or read up on it as I have, because I did not participate in cycle 6, past cycles allocation methodologies as it comes from taking the determination and assigning it to each local jurisdiction has been to basically determine the percentage of jobs that are existing in each jurisdiction, the percentage of the total population, and then applying it based on those 2 factors. In the past few, I believe the past few cycles have weighted both jobs and population equally. So as a point to note, for the past few months and longer before then as well, HCOG staff have been meeting with the community development department staff from all of the local agencies and the county. And right now what's being discussed on the staff level, and staff anticipate it bringing forward for consideration in the board by the board when this comes forward to select a preferred methodology, would be to weight citing housing near jobs higher. Clearly, it's one of the areas that's being more prioritized in the RENA objectives, and it's consistent with the other areas of plans that are being brought forward through the region. So we do anticipate bringing forward options that have, again, more weighting factor towards areas with higher employment numbers. Other things we will be considering as a working group, we call it the RENA working group with HCOG staff and the community development staff, would be potentially blending in other factors that could be considered outside just jobs and housing. So one of the RENA objectives that is new that we will have to substantiate in our methodology submission to HCD is number 5 there, furthering state fair housing goals. And one of the common ways, if not the most common way to do that through the RENA process, would be to look at what are called the CTAC opportunity scores, which I believe are developed and brought forward by the Department of Finance. So basically citing new housing in areas with higher opportunity, be that income levels and education levels and parks and open space, things of that nature. So we will be further developing those. In the past, I believe kind of 3 iterations of a methodology has been brought forward. Staff anticipate bringing something like that similar to the board for consideration, ultimately with the hope of identifying a preferred alternative for a methodology to move forward with, which is a perfect segue into the timeline, the anticipated timeline for how we get from where we are this evening to having an adopted regional housing needs plan. So in the timeline here, you'll see that we're in mid-July, so we have officially ended our HCD consultation period with the receipt of our regional housing needs determination. And we have also sent out the survey, which was included in the staff report as an informational item. Those all went to your local jurisdictions. The community development staff will be reviewing those and providing information for HCOG to consider in the development of the methodology. So those went out. We have received our determination, and now our intent / hope is over the next month to finalize development of are the staff recommended options for the allocation methodology itself, and to bring those forward to the board for consideration at our August meeting. If the board is able to come up or to select a preferred alternative from what is brought forward on the staff level, we would move forward with noticing all of the local jurisdictions that is the preferred alternative. We would do noticing in order to initiate our ability to do a public hearing on that methodology at our following board meeting in September. And assuming that no changes are desired or no public comment happens that makes the board want to reconsider the methodology or make adjustments, that would ultimately move forward, hopefully by the November meeting, to adopt a methodology itself, which would then be submitted to the Department of Housing and Community Development for their review. Once they sign off on it, HCOG is able to put together the final regional housing needs plan, which is the final board certified document that finalizes the process and makes it so local agencies can move forward with their housing elements. So a few things of note in here. This is kind of the simplified process. You know, if big comments are received, if a jurisdiction decided to take exception to what was being noticed as a result of the allocation methodology that was recommended in August, this could extend out based on the various iterations of noticing and this period and that period. It could take many months longer than that, but this is if everything goes ducks in a row throughout the process. So a couple other important things I just wanted to note so the board is aware. So the regional housing needs plan is not due to the state until July of 2026. So that's the final deliverable, so to speak, that we would be producing through HCOG. All of the community development staff at your local agencies are of the mind, and I tend to agree, to move through this process as quickly and efficiently as we can, so that local agencies know what their allocation numbers are, they know where they fall, and it gives them more time to prepare and to complete the housing elements in each jurisdiction, which ultimately is a significantly bigger lift than the allocation methodology we're doing here now. And then with that, the local agency housing element due dates are July of 2027. So to end with that, and I imagine there's some questions, and happy to answer whatever I can at this time. I do have just some questions posed here that would be areas that we would certainly welcome at this time to get from the board to help take our next steps on the staff level. So the first one would be any thoughts the board has on an allocation method. As I noted, right now among the working group, the consideration is to weight housing more towards the economic centers, and would love to hear the board's thoughts or opinions on that, or if there's any other considerations you would like staff to explore insofar as a methodology at this time. If you have any questions on the development schedule or when that would be coming back to the board, by all means, happy to or would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then lastly, one of the policy changes they did in the 2040 housing plan was to put a priority for HCD staff to be able to present to COGS on the determinations that are made. So there is an open-ended offer that we could set up as early as our August meeting for HCD staff to present the determination, which is the tables from the first few slides, and they could walk through any of those adjustments or answer any questions that you may have at that time. Given where it lines up, we'll be presumably further along in the methodology process at that point, but it is an offer, and if the board is interested, we're more than happy to set that up as well. So with that, we'd just love to hear any questions or thoughts from the board. So thank you.
Okay. Any questions or input? Yes.
Thank you. So I have quite a bit of notes to share. We had a joint meeting. Our community development director and assistant director met with both the planning commission and city council to discuss this in particular at one of our recent study sessions. And so I'm not just speaking from myself. I'm speaking from the vast majority of both boards. It wasn't completely unanimous, but it was the vast majority. So hopefully I'm getting this right. And if not, Mayor Stillman can come up during public comment and correct the record. So City of Arcata remains firmly committed to infill development and smart growth. And we think we've demonstrated that by the recent passage of the Gateway Area Plan, which does designate capacity for thousands of housing units in our city's urban core. And we're also working on objective design standards for the Valley West area so that we can streamline infill for there. I find these percentages, I actually asked staff, I double checked to make sure these were correct because it's pretty, I think it says a lot. So Arcata has 14% of the county's population, and we have permitted 85% of the county's total of very low income housing in this sixth cycle. And 40% of the county's total low-income units to date. So we feel that this illustrates our leadership in advancing deeply affordable housing, and it's often the hardest category to deliver. We've worked very hard to deliver those units. We're currently at 81% in achieving our six-cycle goals. We're very nervous with the new numbers coming out that we don't think we can meet them no matter how we weight this. I mean, that's a concern from our end. So with this cycle to be the largest ever allocated to Humboldt County, we think that the methodology needs to strike a balance that is an equitable distribution of housing growth across all jurisdictions. We believe this method still promotes infill development, and it's a progressive stance on ensuring that jobs and housing are built together. Also bringing up a couple points, infill housing does bring jobs, and so that's something to consider. Also, available land. We have been using a great portion of our available land for housing. And so for those jurisdictions that haven't been building housing, they're not going through their available land like we are. So we have real concerns about our available land. To support compliance with the state housing mandates and affirmatively further fair housing in the seventh cycle, we believe that the RENA methodology should incorporate a performance-based adjustment factor, particularly focused on affordable housing production. So we'd like to be considered for the housing that we've been, that 85% that we've been already providing. This would incentivize all jurisdictions to develop affordable housing in their communities and avoid concentrations of affordable housing in just one or two communities. So this would equal a more balanced distribution, which is essential to achieving both equity and sustainability across the region. Both Arcata and Eureka have produced a disproportionate share of the region's affordable housing, and I'm not speaking for Eureka, but they do join us in that. And while we remain committed to supporting regional housing goals, continuing to concentrate a high percentage of affordable housing in allocations in Arcata places an increasing strain on our public infrastructure, city services, and limited community resources. We have, just as everyone does, grants because of our housing status and how well we're doing. We actually have a benefit sometimes in grants because we're meeting our goals and we're in compliance with our housing element. And so if we aren't meeting our goals and our numbers, it's Arcata who will face those consequences. So we believe the numbers being allocated to our county, they're going to be significantly larger, and we don't want to overcommit. So we felt like the way it was, the sixth cycle was pretty fair and balanced, and we liked a methodology that reflects that. And just to really put a finer point on it, just to be clear, our community development director asked us point blank, do you want to just take the fair share, or would you like to take on more because of our economic center? And it was overwhelmingly, we don't want to take on more than what is considered to be our fair share. And we would like other communities to step up and help us with this. So that's a lot from Arcata. Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Supervisor Madrone.
Thank you, and thank you for that. I agree. I mean, Arcata has been doing amazing work, and just getting the gateway plan through when there were so many, what do we call them, NIMBYs, I guess, or whatever. And many of them are my close friends. I'm like, you're a bunch of white entitled landowners that just don't want anything over 2 stories. I'm like, what the heck's up with that, you know? So I've had many deep conversations with many of them, but you guys have been doing an amazing job there as well. I think the county is stepping up in McKinleyville in particular. In the rest of the unincorporated areas of the county, there's not that much going on, right? Because a lot of it was supported by the cannabis industry, which has crashed. And so there's a lot of vacant housing. And, you know, reading those numbers is an interesting thing. I appreciate the little adjustment we got for cost burden, but I'm not sure it's really accurate because, I mean, McKinleyville, I've been told that the average single-family home right now, 30 years old in a subdivision, is $500,000. I'm sorry, but that's way over 30% of most people's income. And I mean, this is the whole community. So some of those numbers I question, and I would love to have a presentation from HCD. I think that would be a great thing at our August meeting. But in McKinleyville, we've spent since I got in office, we started working on our town center ordinance. And it was actually in our 2001 community plan to do this, but for other reasons I won't get into, it wasn't happening. And it was one of the things that I jumped into and got full support of our board, I will say. Unanimous support of our board to support John Ford and the planning department, some of the senior planners we had there to really dive into this town center ordinance. Because if we just keep developing single-family homes and subdivisions in McKinleyville, we aren't going to get there. I mean, that's only so many units because they cover so much land. Yeah, some of them are duplexes, so they're a little more affordable, maybe only 400,000, or something. But with the town center ordinance, we're proposing, it's going to be finalized by the MICMAC in about a week and a half or 2 weeks, and then it goes to the Planning Commission and then to the Board of Supervisors. So we're, in the next several months, looking at getting that completed. I believe it will have strong support. There are a couple of people that aren't ready for the density. At some recent meetings, it was really interesting how, older folks in my age group were like, oh, that's way too dense, But the young folks were like almost unanimously like, oh, we love density, it's vibrant, it's this whole thing, So that was interesting. But we're looking at, just in the town center area alone, looking at, I think, 2,500 units or so, 6,000 more people, which is a big change. McKinleyville is already really the second or third largest city. Depends on if it's summer or not. But we're at 16,000, 17,000 people in McKinleyville. And it's still unincorporated, which is a whole nother topic. But within that town center ordinance, it's not just all development. There's actually about a third of the area being set aside as open space parks, trails, and wetland mitigation areas. And all, amazing, bringing back to life a creek that's been in a ditch for the last 50 years and things like that. So there's really great environmental things, which I see in some of the categories here of importance, is to maintain open space and environmental protection. But that's a lot of units that we're proposing to add, and it won't happen in 1 year, though. But over the, what is this, a 5-year cycle, cycle 7, is that, or?
RENA cycles are 8 years.
8 years, okay. So over that 8 years, we might see half of those built. I mean, it depends on the economy, whether we continue to grow or not grow. And one of the ideas is that by having multi-storied, we're allowed to go up to like 4 or 5 stories in this development, that there could be condominiums. There really are no condominiums in Humboldt County that we're aware of in our discussions, and those are in the more affordable category with shared walls and things like that. So it's pretty exciting, I think, on many levels. And in the county, of course, we have a rent control ordinance on mobile home parks, which has also been helpful in maintaining affordable rents in these mobile home parks where people are kind of captive, in that they have their home, but they don't own the lot and all that kind of stuff. So I do believe that we're going to be able to make a lot of progress there. Willow Creek has added a new sewage treatment system. They've presently been on septic systems, which has been a constraint on development. And there's a lot of old stuff in Willow Creek, but I believe with that new sewer system, they're going to have increased capacity. Oric is on the verge of having their plans completed for a sewage treatment system in Oric as well. So within the unincorporated areas of the county, I'm seeing some good movement towards the ability to add housing and hopefully significant affordable housing as well. So that would be a kind of an update from the county perspective. You know, how it all gets divvied up is important. This is new to me. I have not been involved with RENA numbers or allocations before. So it is all very new to me. And there was no chart really here that showed what the allocations are, right? That wasn't in your slideshow, unless I missed it. Was there an allocation number?
Not the allocations
Not
per
per district.
jurisdiction.
Right.
Because that falls out of the methodology.
It was total. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, great. Yeah. So look forward to that, I guess. So, thank you.
One, if I just might add to that, thank you for all of that and for all that you're doing. And one of the things, and Director Byrd, please correct me if I get this wrong, but one of the frustrations that our community development director had was under cost burden, it's actually not to our advantage, because it used to be in previous cycles that Humboldt County was compared to California, to rents in California. And so we were right there. Now they're comparing California to the whole United States. That's why we were like 40% cost burdened in California. I think that's what we are, whereas the rest of many states are 30. So that's why we're getting a lot of these extra, because they're trying to make us equal with the other states, which is putting a real extra burden on the whole state.
Yeah, and so basically how they look at it, and this is actually, cost burden's a new one to Cycle 7, and to Board Member Atkins Salazar's point, our region is about 42% cost burden based on the data that the Department of Finance uses, and the new 2040 housing policy document put forward by the state references comparing to the federal average, basically the nation's average. And again, that falls back also to the point I made about the comparative regions analysis. That was just their practice to compare to the national average before. AB 130 has actually substituted the language to refer to national average as being the benchmark now, which is about 30%. So what they're doing with that about 3,600 unit adjustment in what we got is saying, hey, we think you need this many units in the county, basically to quote unquote flood the market, if you want to think about it in those terms, and bring housing costs down otherwise. It doesn't always work like that. And of course, you know, we know every region is different and they have their different drivers. And unfortunately for Humboldt, one of our bigger drivers is just how few jobs we have per household. They consider 1.5 jobs per household to be that really healthy benchmark. That's a, you know, the target that they're looking for. So if you have more than 1.5 jobs per household, they say add housing, right? Because you need more workers. If you have less than, you're below that. And I believe Humboldt right now is at about 0.8 jobs per household. So it'll still be a challenge we face, you know, regardless on the RENA process and the number of units and all the adjustments. But so, yeah. Thank you.
Question
Yes.
for whoever can answer. What is the most efficient way to address the 3,600 or whatever that are based on the spending more than 30%? Is that essentially more than 3-story apartment buildings? Is whoever might know? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that as far as that, the 3,600 unit for cost burden, that doesn't necessarily fall into any one of those income category buckets. It just adds to the overall allocation, which is then split by the income categories per the subsequent table I showed. But, you know, when they're talking about all those areas of the lower income housing types, you know, in the low or even the very low, you might be talking about multifamily housing. Then you start to get even further down the line and you start to get into subsidized housing and things of that nature too. So there's really from my understanding, and I'm certainly not an expert in this, but a full suite of types of solutions that would be looked at meeting those particular income level goals. They do have defined income levels that are a part of each one of those, be it acutely low, extremely low, very low, and all the way up. And I would imagine that, you know, when housing projects are brought in, there's a category that they fall into that makes it meet those income thresholds. But typically more density equals more affordability.
Okay. And is it accurate to say that infill is becoming sort of a euphemism for taller buildings downtown.
Yes, and I mean infill at its core, are just developable sites within a jurisdiction's boundaries. So you're not, the urban sprawl. You're not going out into green space and infill to get bang for your buck in areas. Of course, is also building more stories and building more density with it too. So that's kind of the modern definition, and how it's applied to a lot of the housing that is done now kind of goes in that direction, to answer your question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on how much open space you have within your town. Like Arcata, we have very few vacant spaces, and so for us the only way is up.
Yeah.
And that's why we did the whole gateway development. There just isn't room. So I think it depends on your situation.
Right. But I think that's very common in most larger cities or whatever. So just an observation too. I really hope they can find a way to get a handle on making the tiny homes affordable, because they seem to be disproportionately expensive for the size that they are. And that's frustrating, because in a more rural environment, they fit in nicely and everything, but so expensive. It's like, not really much of a effective solution.
Any other comments or questions or comments on the allocation method or public comment? Yes.
Thank you. Having had the pleasure of participating in, I'm sorry, no, you
No.
go.
You'll be next.
Okay,
Just
okay.
hang out.
Okay. I raised my hand for public comment, even though I'm sitting here. So having had the pleasure of being part of cycle 5 and 6, allocations, and the zoning code updates are a great tool for what the ways are to fit more units on a property, allowing more density, allowing more of the lot to be covered by housing or other tools for infill as well, and ADUs, of course. But I did want to, I know it's sort of beating my head against a wall that's unlikely to give, but I do hope that this board would be interested in giving this feedback, that for communities like ours, where we have a large number of under-maintained buildings, it would be a huge benefit to our communities. And when I think about Eureka, I see this all the time. Homes that are currently considered part of our housing stock that are unlivable. And for those to be made livable again, granted, it would be difficult because it's sort of incentivizing like private property owners to fix up their property with potentially public dollars. But if there was some strategy to take communities that have had unmaintained historic or older structures and to make those housing units livable again, it could add so much to our housing stock in the footprint that we already have. And I've brought that up every time that housing comes up and been told, well, that's very nice, Natalie, but there's a few tools for that. There's a few grants out there to help homeowners, but very few, and there are very few even low income or low cost loans for folks who would like to do that. And I will say, I bought the house next door to me that had been vacant for 40 years and was unlivable and filled with pests like rodents, and it was in squalid condition and nearly a tear down, and turned it into housing again. But that doesn't count towards our unit count. So I think any voices joining me in urging HCD to consider an inventory of homes that are not usable for housing and give credit for any programs that make those homes livable again is worthwhile, even if it takes like 20, 30 years to get there. I think more voices for communities like ours, where we have a lot of poor communities where people have, for whatever reason, let homes fall into disrepair, where there's just not the property values to keep that level of maintenance up like there are in some wealthier communities. I think that has value. It may not help us in this RENA cycle, but I really urge this board to consider that. And from a transit perspective, many of these homes are in our like urban cores already. And I'm thinking of many, a potential prioritization opportunity to say these homes are already, in a transit friendly area and near jobs and are simply not livable at this time. So I think an HCD presentation would be really cool, and to continue to get that message out. And if anyone's interested in writing a letter about this, I would be happy to work with you on it.
Thank you. Mayor Stillman. And she's on the pack, so actually she is public right now.
I'm on
not
public, okay? So what I wanted to say, I totally agree with what you're saying, because when I first moved here to this county in the early 70s, that's what I bought. I bought houses that were no longer livable and rehabbed them, and I also made additional units. So if I could, I would redo it, tear the garage down and build a new garage with a unit above it. This isn't what I was going to talk about, but this is part of how you can increase your living units within your community, whether or not that would work anymore. I don't do that anymore. I did that, I don't know, for about 20 more years. But so and then I drive around and I think, oh my gosh, what would it be like if people painted their houses? We could be a really cute, attractive, much more attractive community. And I think about that, I just went in Fortuna. We were down at the transit meeting down there, and coming back and wandering around, you just think about the difference it could give everyone if that happened. But what I wanted to address is single stairways. So that was part of our council meeting with our planning commission, is to talk about the single stairway instead of having like a hotel kind of way that you have 2 staircases and you have a long hallway. And with the single staircase, I don't think it's going to happen right away, because I think maybe it was in the new update for the building codes, which have been put on hold for, I don't know, a few years now, I think 3 or 4. But I think that some of the jurisdictions could actually do that. And that gives you an opportunity on smaller lots within your community to be able to build some additional housing. And you could fill it out much better than if you had to have 2 staircases if you are up to 3 floors. And in some of these areas, you could actually have a lower floor, like many units in other communities. They have what they call the basement apartment or whatever, and then you'd have 2 floors above it if you could do a single staircase. And Arcata is really concerned about the amount of housing that we provided for low income now, critically low, et cetera. And we've done a really good job. And we have not done a good job in providing for those that can afford housing. So that's where we stand on that issue. And it's bothersome to see the numbers that we're supposed to now come up with when we've constantly been providing in one way or another for those that qualify for income housing, rates and so forth. And we've done a really good job. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, input? Yes, Supervisor Madrone.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue of affordability, in the county we have, it used to be called Class K, but now it's called Alternative Owner Builder, which is a far less burdensome process for fixing up homes, less cost for the permits, less inspections, although you still got to build everything to code. It just reduces the burden. I get calls every month from people that are wanting to rehab a home, and then they run into this thing where they're in a community service district like Fieldbrook that has water. That's all it has, water, now sewer, but AOB doesn't apply there. So there's certainly additional things we can do in the county, I think, to try and amend our ordinances to be more reflective of the incentivizing of rehabbing older homes that need, that aren't even being occupied. So that's certainly one of those areas that we can do that. And we did pass an ADU ordinance and tiny homes, and we're working on a number of different aspects to all of that. And yet it's still not really taken off on certain levels, I think, because of burdens of laterals and hookups and all kinds of other things. And that's where waterless toilets come in and other kinds of things that can help incentivize. Maybe that's not appropriate for in the cities, but there's certainly a lot of rural areas where, that can help provide those things. So that's one of the areas. I had a question. What if you don't meet your numbers? What are the repercussions to that? We didn't really talk about that at all. And I am kind of blown away that we're going from like 3,000 something up to almost 6,000. It's like, whoa. I mean, where in the world do they think this is all going to happen? It's kind of a little bit crazy. And maybe it's like was said earlier that we're being compared to the whole country now. And that's created part of this surge as well. And I noted in here, some of the items that were, the cost burden stuff, but there was also the vacancy adjustment. And does that not cover, is there no inventory or assessment of these vacant homes and these kinds of things? Or is that not what that deals with? So a couple of questions there. Sorry for.
Yeah, no worries. And I believe I can speak to most of them. So I'll start with the most recent one first. As it pertains to vacancy, what they look at are houses, either rentals or single family occupied houses that are on the market. So they remove from their adjustment calculation houses that are vacant because they're vacation homes or, just aren't used. They don't, my understanding is they don't count those towards your vacancy that could be turned into housing. So to Supervisor Arroyo's point, they don't count in your favor. They count against you because they're only looking at what's on the market. Wow. Yeah. And then as it goes again to the other adjustments and how everything is coming in, again, it's a lot of those new ones. And part of the reason that it just keeps getting bigger is like a lot of things in the regulatory environment, as new cycles come along, they don't tend to remove things. They tend to add that next layer, right? We see that with the building codes. We see it with water and wastewater regulations. And, we're seeing it here in the housing policy determinations that are coming. So adding more of those adjustment areas. And quite honestly, in some of the early iterations that we were receiving, and part of the reason was we worked through 4 different draft allocations with HCD is because, HCD has been adding more and more of these adjustments, some of which it kind of seems like, at least in staff's determination, were also being accounted for in the Department of Finance's numbers that get blended into it too. So, there's a lot of gray areas to what actually is the root cause of where all these units need to be added. But in any event, they are adding more and more factors to account for when they provide those determinations. Lastly, to speak to the unit. So RENA and the housing elements are about zoning the land, setting aside the land, identifying where it would go, identifying how it would all unfold, putting policies to match housing element law. So there's some additional policies that end up in there that a jurisdiction will explore this or apply for this grant or some other things. And I'm being kind of high level about it because I don't have a tremendous amount of familiarity with the housing element law. But it is not incumbent upon a jurisdiction to produce all that housing within the planning period. It's just to set it up so that it can be produced. So at the end of the day, outside of some areas, where some low income projects are encouraged or brought forward in the policy document itself, if you fall short of your housing numbers because of whatever it was, that in and of itself it doesn't count against you. It's if you're not consistent with the policy from your housing element. And again, some of those, some jurisdictions bring in policy that is above and beyond maybe what is actually required as a minimum in the code. But there are some, code minimums that would ask local jurisdictions to be doing certain work too. So, and those are the areas that you can get, let's say, in trouble with, so to speak, with HCD. So,
Well, it was mentioned earlier for Arcata in particular, with all the great work they're doing over there, that it's certainly given them better access to grants. So is there really just a sort of a positive result that if you're doing really good, you have better access to grants? And if you're not doing so well, you have less access to grants? Or is there any relationship there at all? It's just Arcata's really good at going after grants.
No, there's big fines, and also the builder's remedy if you're out of, and I'm not an expert, but a couple of things. If you're deemed to be out of compliance, like you're actively making policies and doing things that are blocking production and certain things, then let's say there's a project that wants to go in Arcata, and we've just made it so difficult that they cannot. Then if they can prove that, then they can go in and use state standard and build exactly what they want to build. So that's why Arcata, we've been so aggressive, because it's really it's difficult to get all the housing. But if we can do the form-based codes and try to put out there what we want that's also in compliance, then we're trying to incentivize people to come. But if we don't do a good job, they can come anyways, and then they can do what they want to do. So it's one of the only ways you can retain control, a limited control over what you have in your community. I mean, I think most of us would love for the communities to just stay the same, but that's just not how it works. But the other thing we learned was a very kind of depressing study session we had, is that, and I don't know the exact years, but if vacant lots are counted. So if we have a vacant lot that continues to sit vacant, they will eventually say, no, you can't count that one anymore. There must be something wrong with it. Nobody's building on it. Give us a different vacant lot. So maybe it's just that somebody doesn't want to build on it, but it will, we only have so many vacant lots. So there's a lot of very unfair things, I would say, happening and difficult. So we should probably be very careful if we do host HCD that we treat them kindly with all of our questions.
So would you say that the village on I Street is a good example of what you're talking about, where the neighborhood and the community pretty much blocked a lot of long-term planning there, and the university said, fine, we're going to come in and buy it and work under the state rules, and we don't have to adhere to local.
Well, kind of, but it's a little bit different because they were a state agency. I feel like that was more of a lesson to those of us in leadership. I mean, I wasn't on that council. I don't know what I would have done, but it was basically, they did kind of push the developers out after they spent a couple $1 million. And then it just so happened that Cal Poly bought it and built. But, if you as a builder, say you had a building company, you don't have to be a state agency. You can just your own construction company claim that and build it.
Any other? Yes.
I do have a question about private builds. So it's my understanding private builds don't count. So we've got projects going in from different private builders with, 6, 7 units per. Those don't count toward our arena numbers. Do you know what the reason for that? No, I was told they didn't count.
Yeah, my understanding is any unit counts, and one of the bigger differences in as they actually get implemented is, private builders often are building market rate or near market rate housing. So there, that's where just the economic activity and the demand will carry the delivery of the project. It's the lower income areas that are not fully private, that are subsidized. That's just pretty much the only way you can deliver most of that low income housing, is when you take the pure private development piece out of it. Not that you don't have private developers working on low income housing projects, but they're not, funded privately.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because that's not what
And that's
what I was told.
Yeah, and that's what we're struggling with, what Mayor Stillman alluded to. Part of the reason we're doing well with the affordable housing is because it is a public-private partnership. And so there's grant monies and tax incentives that can make it affordable, but we're very much struggling to get market rate housing. And that's the one area we're not meeting our goals, because it's very difficult for it to pencil out. And that's another thing that the state, the people that are giving us the numbers aren't looking at. It's not that people don't want to build, they can't afford to build. Mm-hmm. And so something has to give in that way, and that's not being considered.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it ties back to jobs and housing is tied together very closely, and a lot of market rate is also not being built because there's not a consumer for it that can afford it at this point because of the economic conditions. So, yeah, there's plenty of plenty of things that play into it, but I would encourage the board members. So I'll take away certainly as direction to ask the HCD staff that worked on their determination to come in and just give us a little bit of a presentation of what they've put forward, and would certainly encourage board members to be thinking about potential questions, or certainly if there's things that you would like to hear specifically as part of the presentation, feel free to reach out and let me know so I can help guide them in that.
Good idea. Get him here. Yeah. Well, if we're done with that, we can move on to HCOG staff and PAC member reports, with the executive director's report first.
Excellent. And not to go back into the past so soon, but two other items that I took away, and I just wanted to make sure that there are no others, to make sure that staff and the Reno working group are bringing back options for regional allocations that are still balanced too for consideration. So not necessarily going all in one direction or the other, but bringing forward things that are balanced and, alternatives for consideration that are more consistent with things that we've looked at in the past. And then also looking more closely into, again, this is already a RENA objective, trying to make sure that you don't put too many low income units together, or you don't put too many high income units together. In the past, I believe we've only looked at one or two alternatives for how to move a region's economic allocations. Maybe we can look at more of those. So those are just two other areas that I took out of the discussion that we'll take back to the group. Okay. So for the executive director's report, and Amy, could you pull up the bike month, please? Excellent. So I will start with bike month. So as the board is aware, HCOG plays a key role every year in May in promoting and taking part in and helping facilitate Bike Month and Bike Month events. So of course this last May was in fact Bike Month, and I just wanted to start out by saying I know we have several staff members that worked long and hard and put a lot of effort into this, and I want to recognize them for all of what they did. And my understanding is, having come on really at the very tail end of all of this, is that it was very successful, and I'm sure with the new Bay Trail, people are going to be even more excited in subsequent years to be moving this forward. But just one of these numbers, and so this little flyer here is something that was put together. This is the kind of the Bike Month review results flyer. It is available, and you can peruse it at your leisure on Humboldt Bike Month, their website. So you can check it out there. But just the one that stuck out to me is the bottom left there. Almost 25,000 miles ridden by participants in Humboldt County. That's a pretty impressive number. So again, you can look more into that and see it on Humboldt Bike Month's website. I wanted to provide some updates on some of the projects that we're working on at the staff level at HCOG. The first is the very MC Escher-ish. The first is our level of traffic stress study that is being performed. This is that is hard to focus with, isn't it? Yeah. The first is our level of traffic stress study. This is a study that came out of our most recent regional transportation plan. It has been being worked on by staff at HCOG since 2024, I believe. So in the next few weeks, staff do anticipate releasing a public draft that'll go out for comment and go out to local agencies. And for those who don't know, the level of traffic stress is a measurement of the bike and pedestrian network and how comfortable people feel on the infrastructure and how it all connects together. And it ultimately results in maps that give it priority rankings, and it really is an informative tool to help agencies think about and plan for complete streets projects or connectivity projects or bikeway projects, things of that nature. So that will be coming out for public comment here pretty soon. We're also doing our Vision Zero action plan, which again is kind of the follow-up or the next step from the local road safety plans many jurisdictions have been working on. We have done our first community engagement event. We've done a lot of our engagement with local agencies and created our project task force team. The next big area we'll be working on is working with our local agency partners to identify pilot safety projects. So again, if you've driven around in the last couple of years and seen some of the pilot projects that get done now with delineators or temporary striping, things to simulate a traffic condition to see if it is going to work in a certain area or to get public feedback. There are going to be a number of those projects that pop up as part of our Vision Zero action plan. So we are working with our local agency partners, and we're trying to get a couple of projects sprinkled out throughout the county. But I know the county is certainly interested. I know the city of Arcata, the city of Eureka, and the city of Fortuna are all interested at this point. And Blue Lake, I know, has some potential projects as well. We did receive, or I guess not receive, but it did go to the CTC late last month. The STIP estimates came out, so the State Transportation Improvement Program that funds a lot of the local discretionary transportation projects that are completed. That estimate came out, and the programming capacity for the next 5 years was estimated at $5.8 million. Unfortunately, it is a reduction from what we saw in 2024, where it was $9.8 million. A small piece of this is because in 2024, the TAC recommended over-programming to make sure that all of the projects as proposed could be completed. But otherwise, you know, as you can imagine, as fuel sales go down, and a lot of this is tied to gas tax, that the STIP itself goes down. So, you know, I know the board has seen that Caltrans and others are working on looking at different ways that like a road user mileage charge or things to transition away from the gas tax itself can be developed ultimately to fund road improvement projects. But in the short term, you know, we're starting to see with the increase in, you know, the non-fossil fuel vehicles, the fossil fuel based funding sources, and that is the strategy to fund transportation projects. We're starting to see that go down with this STIP estimate. And lastly, I wanted to note that at our last board meeting, we brought the carbon reduction programs forward. There were 4 projects, and on the tail end, staff was going to work to get those programmed and determine their eligibility. We have submitted each project to the program coordinator, so just FYI, all 4 projects as proposed were determined eligible with the program, and we're just wrapping up getting that programmed with Caltrans in the FSTIP right now. So speaking of Caltrans, as we all know, Tasha is not here with us today to give the Caltrans report, but she did send over some notes that I'll share. So first and foremost, HCOG was announced in the last couple of weeks as the recipient for a planning study grant, a Safe Routes to School Planning and Connectivity Study grant for Lolita. And that was from the Caltrans Sustainable Planning Grant Program, I believe. So that's to the tune of about $300,000, and it's a collective application. HCOG was the lead applicant, but it's also including the county and RCAA as well. So we have had meetings on the staff level. We are working on meeting our conditions ultimately to get under contract for that grant and hopefully be kicking off work on that grant, consultant involved work on that grant later this year. Let's see. There are two public meetings that are coming up for Caltrans projects, just to keep everybody aware. The first is on July 22nd. There's going to be a meeting at Ferndale City Hall for the Ferndale Access Project. So the next meeting that will be the Ferndale Access Project, which for anybody who does not know is the Fern Bridge project specifically. And then the next one is actually on the very next day. Caltrans will be hosting a virtual workshop for some early engagement, I believe, on the Eureka Slough Bridge replacement project. I do believe that one also went out on Los Cos Outpost, so most people should have seen that. But there is a link to where folks can join that there. And then lastly, Caltrans is working on finalizing their 10-year shop, and that is anticipated to be brought to the board as a presentation by Caltrans staff at our next meeting in August. So with that, that's everything I have to report.
Any questions for, yes, Mayor Brito.
Could you just clarify the bridge meeting is July 23rd? Do you have a time?
I can give you a time because it is in
5:30.
5:30. Thank you. All good.
Any other questions? None right now. We have no Caltrans report, except what you fill this in on that she sent over. PAC and board member reports. Anything to report?
Sure. Oh, you were looking at me, so I wasn't sure if that was a cue. I'll wait.
Well, I know where you were with the transit.
Okay, I'll just go fast. I was at the North State Transit Symposium in friendly and sunny Fortuna. Lovely. We had 100 attendees, and really, it was great to hear from transit agencies, including folks in Riverside and the Monterey Coast and the Chico area and Lake County, Mendocino. A lot of our partners in transit from all around the state were there. And we really got to be like pretty fancy and talk about how we're the first rural transit agency in the nation to have a hydrogen bus and hydrogen fueling. So we really are out there on the forefront of rural transit agencies nationwide. And the company that made our hydrogen bus, New Flyer, since we did have to have a bus specially designed for our great geographic range and hills and all of the performance needs of Humboldt Transit Authority, that bus is going to be available to other buyers, although we were the first one to get it. So they announced, the company announced that at the symposium today that'll now be on the market for other rural transit agencies who are very interested. It was really cool to talk with folks who work on rural transit issues, even as far away as Alaska, and work with Native communities on transit, and really wanted to build connections in our region. So all very exciting stuff. That was the primary report I have from HTA, but thanks for those who joined, and it was really cool to be the star of the rural transit world. So
Good job. Any other board member reports? Yes, Supervisor Madrone.
Free buses. Woohoo.
gosh, yeah, all month long.
Yeah.
And all of next month for youth and seniors as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
my kids, grandkids are using it and really are like, oh man, it's free. Let's go. So kudos to HTA for bringing that forward once again. I mean, I think we all hope for the day where the bus system is free year round. It only costs maybe $1 million or so to actually subsidize that in terms of fare box and stuff. But there are complications, and HTA has been discussing the options and all the different parts to it. Anyway, I really appreciate that. One quick update on Scenic Drive and up in the Trinidad, West Haven area. So we just got this yesterday. The congressionally directed spending through the office of U.S. Senator Adam Schiff wanted to let us know that the senator submitted a project titled, quote, Creation of a Long-Term Plan to Repair Trinidad Scenic Drive, Old State Highway 101. It was actually Old State Highway 1. Project development, geotechnical exploration, and preliminary design to the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation, Housing, Urban Development, and related agencies. Now, it certainly doesn't guarantee anything, but this is huge. Just getting it in there and having the senator, push this for our community. It truly is one of the economic engines for the Trinidad area. It's part of the California Coastal Trail, and it's going to be an expensive project. There's no doubt about it. But the good news is it's all doable. It's just engineering. There's bedrock under a lot of that. While everything looks really unstable, underneath it is bedrock. And so it's engineering solutions that are very expensive. But it's nice to finally turn a corner on that, because 5 years ago, Scenic Drive wasn't even on HCOG's list to even be considered for any funding support whatsoever. And that has changed as the county has stepped up and said, we'll sponsor this. So it's now on that list. But boy, if we can get this chunk of funding to get that initial phase done, as we all know, that's what then leads to all the other pieces that have to happen before you get into your $40 or $50 million project, literally. So anyway, that was some good news, and let's all keep a good thought. Hopefully it makes it through this Congress at some level, and we can move that forward. So thank you.
Any others? I will only say that Fortuna was happy to host the transit symposium, and come back this weekend for a rip-roaring rodeo time. And next week, or next Friday and Saturday is, I know it's a dirty word because it's an automobile with an internal combustion engine, but classic car show. And a lot of love and cherish. Most of those don't get driven as much as you think they do. They show up in trailers and go home in trailers, but they do get to Fortuna somehow, don't they? So with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you.